A year ago, everything changed when Lucas, my new stepbrother, walked into our home and made me see the world through new eyes. Hello, dear friends, in this story I will tell you how one guy walked into my life and turned it upside down. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee and stay with me until the end. It will be a wild ride, I promise. My name is David, I am 24 years old and I live in Albany, New York with my mother and her new husband. It all kicked off when my mom married Greg, a laid-back guy with a warm smile and a love for old vinyl records. Greg was a widower, and he had a son, Lucas, a 25-year-old who'd been living in Boston but decided to move in with us to be closer to his dad. I had no idea what to expect. A stepbrother sounded like something from a TV show, where you either hit it off or butt heads forever. When Lucas first stepped through our front door, I was standing in the living room, clutching a mug of cold tea, trying not to stare too hard. He was tall, with dark hair that looked a bit tousled, like he'd just climbed out of bed. His faded denim jacket hung loose on his shoulders, and he wore a leather bracelet that he kept fiddling with. Lucas smiled, not the forced kind you get from strangers, but a real one, like he knew something I hadn't figured out yet. "Hey, I'm Lucas," he said, holding out his hand. "Hope you don't mind me making some noise around here." His voice was deep, with a slight rasp, and I felt my palms get a little sweaty. I shook his hand, muttering something like, "Good to meet you." Mom was bustling around, showing Lucas his room across from mine, and I watched him lug his boxes up the stairs. His movements were confident but easy, and I caught myself watching him longer than I should have. That night at dinner, we barely spoke. Lucas answered Greg's questions about his job at a Boston bookstore, and I poked at my lasagna, trying not to look up. But every time he laughed at one of Mom's jokes, I couldn't help glancing over, noticing how his smile lit up the room. Those first days felt strange. I was used to the quiet in our house, to my books and daydreams about writing novels I never actually started. Lucas brought life, the twang of his guitar through the wall, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the rustle of boxes as he unpacked. I noticed little things, how he left his sneakers by the door, laces half-tied, or how he hummed to himself at the stove. Those details bugged me but also drew me in. I didn't know how to feel about him, but even then, I sensed he wasn't just a new roommate. Lucas was like a spark that ignited something in my quiet life, and I didn't yet know how much it would change me. A couple of weeks had passed since Lucas moved into our house in Albany, and I still couldn't get used to him being around. His guitar filled the evenings with melodies I couldn't shake from my head, and the smell of the coffee he brewed every morning had become part of my routine. I tried to keep my distance, but Lucas didn't seem to notice my attempts to stay out of his way. He was open, friendly, and his easy smile kept catching me off guard, making me feel like I'd forgotten something important. One Saturday, Mom and Greg were gone for the day. I think they went to some farmer's market in a nearby town. I was in my room, flipping through a book I'd read 100 times, when I heard a knock at the door. Lucas was standing in the doorway, wearing a faded band t-shirt and holding 2 DVDs. "You busy?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Found some old movies in the basement. Thought we could watch one if you're up for it." His tone was casual, but I noticed how he waited for my answer, like it mattered to him. I shrugged, trying not to show that his idea intrigued me. "Sure, let's give it a shot," I said, setting the book aside. We went downstairs to the living room, where Lucas popped a disc into the old DVD player. It was some 80s action flick with ridiculous explosions and cheesy lines. We settled on the couch, keeping a decent gap between us, but I could still feel his presence, the warmth radiating from him, the faint scent of his cologne. The movie was absurd but hilarious. Lucas kept tossing out comments, poking fun at the actor's bad delivery, and I couldn't help laughing. "Come on, this guy just survived an explosion and didn't even get dirty," he said, turning to me with a grin. I laughed, and for a moment, our eyes locked. His were warm, sparkling with amusement, and I felt my heart pick up speed. I quickly looked back at the screen, pretending to focus. When the movie ended, we stayed on the couch and the silence between us felt different. Not awkward, but heavy with something unspoken. Lucas stretched, leaning back, and his hand brushed against mine by accident. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through me. "Pretty good night, huh?" he said, glancing at me. "We should hang like this more often." I nodded, trying to hide how his closeness rattled me. "Yeah, it was fun," I said, but my voice came out quieter than I meant. We started talking about random stuff. Movies he loved as a kid, how I once tried learning guitar and quit after a week. Lucas listened closely, teasing me gently but never meanly. I noticed how he leaned in a little when he talked, how his fingers tapped the couch like they were following some rhythm. By the time we decided to head to our rooms, I realized I didn't want the night to end. Lucas stood, stretched, and said, "Night, David. See you tomorrow." I watched him walk away, feeling something shift inside me, like he'd left a mark I couldn't erase. Almost a month had gone by since Lucas became part of our life in Albany, and I started noticing I looked forward to him being around. His laugh at dinner, our quick chats in the hallway, even the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor, it all wove into my days. I still tried to keep my distance, but that was getting harder. Lucas had a way of looking at me just a little too long, and every time, I felt something tighten inside. I didn't know what to do with it, but ignoring it wasn't working anymore. One evening, Mom and Greg went out to meet some friends, leaving me and Lucas alone. I was in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when he walked in with a bag of chips and 2 cans of soda. "It's boring just sitting in my room," he said, setting everything on the table. "Let's do something in the backyard. The weather's perfect." His suggestion caught me off guard, but I couldn't say no. There was something in his voice, infectious, like he knew how to pull me out of my shell. We grabbed an old blanket from the living room and spread it out on the grass behind the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, and the air was warm, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. Lucas lay on his back, hands behind his head, staring at the sky. "I love nights like this," he said, not looking at me. "Back in Boston, I'd sit on my roof, just thinking about stuff." I lay down next to him, keeping a bit of space between us, but I could still feel the warmth coming off him. We started talking, at first about little things, like favorite songs or how I hated chemistry class in high school. But then the conversation turned deeper. Lucas shared how he lost his mom when he was 15, and how it forced him to grow up faster than he wanted. "I got good at hiding what I feel," he said, staring at the sky. "But sometimes I just want to be myself." His voice was quiet, and my heart ached at his words. I told him how I'd always dreamed of leaving Albany but was too scared to take the first step. "Maybe you just need a push," he said, turning to me with a soft smile. At some point, I noticed he was lying closer than before. His hand brushed mine when he reached for the chips, and he didn't pull away right away. It was a simple touch, but it made my breath catch. I looked at him, and his eyes met mine, warm, attentive, like he could see right through me. "You okay?" he asked, holding my gaze. "You look like you're thinking hard about something." I nodded, but my voice betrayed me, coming out shaky. "Just not used to talking like this," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. We stayed out there until late, until stars started dotting the sky. Lucas pointed at a constellation, getting the name wrong, and we both laughed. When we finally headed back inside, his shoulder brushed mine, and a warmth spread through my chest. "Night, David," he said, standing at his door. "That was a good evening." I nodded, but as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about how his closeness made me feel alive. By the time September wrapped Albany in cool air, I couldn't keep pretending Lucas was just my stepbrother. Our evenings in the backyard and quick chats in the kitchen had become something I looked forward to, even if I was scared to admit it to myself. His presence was like a magnet. I tried to stay away, but I kept ending up near him. Lucas seemed to sense this tension, but he never addressed it directly, just gave me that smile that made my heart skip a beat. One weekend, Mom and Greg decided to visit a fair in Saratoga, leaving me and Lucas alone for the day. I was in my room, trying to focus on a book, but my thoughts kept drifting to him. Then he knocked on the door and walked in, holding 2 helmets. "It's too nice out to stay inside," he said, tossing me one of the helmets. "I've got a couple of bikes in the garage. Want a ride?" His eyes sparkled with excitement, and I couldn't say no, even though my heart was already racing at the thought of a day alone with him. We hit the streets of Albany, pedaling past old brick houses and parks where the leaves were starting to turn yellow. Lucas rode ahead, glancing back now and then to make sure I was keeping up. His laugh, as we coasted down a small hill, was so infectious that I couldn't help smiling. We stopped by the Hudson River, where the water shimmered in the sunlight, and leaned our bikes against a tree. Lucas pulled a water bottle from his backpack and handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine, sending a warm jolt up my arm. We sat on the grass, watching the river, and started talking. Lucas told me about his job at the bookstore in Boston, how he loved helping people find books that inspired them. I admitted I'd always wanted to write something of my own but was afraid no one would care to read it. "You won't know until you try," he said, looking right into my eyes. "I'd read your book." His voice was soft but serious, and I felt my cheeks flush. We fell quiet, and the silence between us grew heavy, charged with something new. Lucas shifted closer, his shoulder almost touching mine, and I noticed his hand resting on the grass, just inches from mine. I don't know what made me do it, but I slowly reached out and touched his fingers. He didn't pull away. Instead, he laced his fingers with mine, his skin warm and slightly rough. My pulse sped up, and I looked at him, afraid he'd break eye contact. But Lucas held my gaze, his eyes so deep I felt like I was drowning in them. "David," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "Ever feel like you can't explain what's going on inside you?" I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He gently squeezed my hand, and it was like everything inside me flipped upside down. We sat there for a few minutes, just holding hands, as the river flowed in front of us and the breeze stirred the leaves. When we finally stood to head home, Lucas didn't let go of my hand right away, and I knew that moment had changed everything between us. October in Albany brought chilly evenings, but I felt warmth whenever Lucas was near. After our day by the river, I couldn't stop thinking about how his hand held mine, how his gaze made me feel exposed in the best way. We hadn't talked about that moment, but something between us had shifted. His smiles grew softer, our conversations deeper, like we both knew we were on the edge of something bigger but were scared to take the leap. On Friday, Mom and Greg announced they were heading to Vermont for the weekend to visit friends. My heart raced when I realized Lucas and I would be alone for 2 days. He glanced at me across the table, and his slight smile told me he was thinking the same thing. "We'll manage, right?" he said, winking as Mom listed where the groceries were. I nodded, trying to hide how his look made me nervous. Saturday evening, after our parents left, Lucas suggested starting a fire in the backyard. We dragged out an old chair and a couple of blankets, settling by the small fire pit. The flames crackled, casting warm glows across his face, and I couldn't look away. We talked about small stuff, how he hated Boston winters, my failed attempts at cooking. But when the conversation faded, the silence felt almost tangible. Lucas scooted closer, his knee brushing mine under the blanket, and my breath caught in my throat. "You know, I'm glad I moved here," he said, staring at the fire. "I didn't think I'd find this." His voice was low, and he turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just looked at him, my heart pounding harder. He leaned in slowly, and I knew what was coming. I didn't pull back. His lips touched mine, soft, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to stop. But I didn't want to. I kissed him back, feeling the warmth of his breath mingling with mine. The kiss deepened, slow but full of the feeling we'd both held back for too long. His hand rested on my neck, fingers grazing my skin, and it was like everything inside me lit up. We pulled apart, but only for a moment, just to look at each other. His eyes were so warm, so open, that I couldn't help leaning in again. This time, the kiss was bolder, our lips moving in sync, and I felt his hand slide to my back, pulling me closer. It wasn't just a touch, it was like a promise that we were in this together. We stayed by the fire for a long time, kissing, then just holding hands, until the flames started to die down. Lucas pulled me close, and I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body. "This doesn't make things complicated, does it?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling with emotion. "For us, I mean." I shook my head, even though I knew everything had already changed. "We'll figure it out," I said, and in that moment I believed it. When we headed back inside, his hand stayed in mine, and I knew this night had become our point of no return. After that night by the fire in Albany, I couldn't look at Lucas without remembering the warmth of his lips and how his hands pulled me closer. Our kisses had been a bridge connecting us, but now I felt like we were teetering on the edge of a cliff. We didn't talk about what it meant, but every glance, every accidental touch in the hallway reminded me there was no going back. I wanted to be near him, but the fear that this could ruin everything, our family, our lives, gripped my heart. A few days after our parents returned, I noticed Lucas was being more careful. He still smiled at me across the dinner table, but his touches became less frequent, like he was scared we'd gone too far. I hated the distance, but part of me was grateful for it. It gave me time to think. What if Mom and Greg found out? What if this was all a mistake? Those thoughts swirled in my head as I lay in bed, listening to Lucas play his guitar in his room. One evening when our parents went to a concert downtown, Lucas knocked on my door. He looked nervous, his hair slightly messy, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "I need to talk." I nodded, feeling my heart race. He sat on the edge of my bed, setting the mugs on the nightstand, and looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I can't stop thinking about that night," he said, rubbing his neck. "It scares me, David. But I don't want us to stop." I didn't know what to say, but my body moved faster than my mind. I scooted closer, and he leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was deeper, bolder than before. His hands slid to my shoulders, then down my back, pulling me so close I could feel the warmth of his chest. I kissed him back, my fingers tangling in his hair, his breath hitching as I ran my hand along his neck. We kissed for a long time, our bodies pressed together, and I felt his hands caress my back, slipping under my shirt, grazing my skin. It was like fire. Every move he made sparked something in me I couldn't control. We pulled apart, breathing heavily, and Lucas tugged me closer until I was almost in his lap. His fingers stroked my hair, and my hands rested on his chest, feeling his heart pound. "I want you," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "But I don't want this to break us." I nodded, pressing my forehead to his shoulder, and we sat there, holding each other, as the room filled with silence. We were so close to going further. His hands still rested on my waist, my fingers brushing his skin under his shirt, but we stopped, like we were afraid to cross that line. When he left for his room, I lay on my bed, catching his scent on my pillow. I knew I loved him, but the fear of what came next wouldn't let go. We were one step away from something irreversible, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. November in Albany brought gray days and chilly winds, but inside, I was still burning from our nights with Lucas. After that evening in my room, when we came so close to crossing a line, I couldn't shake the memory of his scent, his touches that felt etched into my skin. We tried to be careful, especially around our parents, but whenever we were alone, our glances and fleeting touches gave us away. I knew I was in love, but the fear that everything could collapse was growing stronger. Mom started noticing things. At dinner, she'd watch me and Lucas a little too long, her brows furrowing when we exchanged looks. One night, as Lucas helped me clear the dishes, she said, "You two spend an awful lot of time together. Everything okay?" Her tone was light, but my heart tightened. I mumbled something about us just getting along, but her look told me she wasn't fully convinced. Lucas stayed quiet, but later, when we were alone, he said, "We need to be more careful, David. But I don't want to hide forever." His words stung because I wasn't ready for honesty, not with our parents, not with myself. The next Friday, our parents left for a charity event, and the house was ours again. I was in my room, trying to distract myself with a book, but my thoughts were all about Lucas. He walked in without knocking, shut the door, and looked at me with that smile that always made my heart skip. "Stop overthinking," he said, sitting next to me on the bed. "I can see you're stressing yourself out." His voice was soft, but there was a determination in it that I always lacked. I didn't get a chance to respond because he leaned in and kissed me. This kiss wasn't cautious like before, it was deep, hungry, like he was trying to say everything he couldn't put into words. I kissed him back, my hands sliding to his shoulders, then his chest, feeling the firmness of his body under his shirt. His fingers tangled in my hair, tugging slightly, and I gasped at the wave of heat that hit me. We fell onto the bed, his body pressing against mine, and I felt his hands slip under my shirt, caressing my back, my waist, touching my skin so gently I shivered. My palms traced his neck, down to his sides, and every sigh he let out sent a tremor through me. We kissed until the air felt heavy, our bodies tangled together, and I could feel his heart beating in time with mine. His lips moved to my neck, leaving a warm trail, and I instinctively pulled him closer, my fingers digging into his back. We were so close to going further. His hand rested on my thigh, my palm lingered on his chest, ready to tug his shirt off. But he stopped, breathing hard, and pressed his forehead to mine. "I don't want to rush this," he whispered, his voice shaky. "Not like this. Not while we're both scared." I nodded, even though every part of me screamed to keep going, and we just lay there, holding each other, until the room filled with silence. When he left, I could still feel his warmth on my skin, but Mom's words kept echoing in my head. I knew we couldn't hide forever, but the thought of coming clean scared me more than I could handle. By early December, I couldn't imagine my life in Albany without Lucas. After that night in my room, when we came so close, his touches and the warmth of his lips became part of me, like breathing. We tried to be careful around our parents, but whenever we were alone, I felt the invisible bond between us growing stronger. Mom kept noticing our glances, asking things like, "Why are you two so quiet?" I brushed it off, but her questions left a cold knot of fear in my chest. One weekend, Lucas suggested driving to Finger Lake, a couple of hours from Albany. "We need some time alone," he said, sitting across from me in the kitchen with a mug of coffee. No eyes, no questions. His voice was steady, but I saw his fingers tremble slightly as he looked at me. I nodded, my heart racing at the thought of a day just with him. We took Greg's car and drove, the silence in the car comfortable, broken only by his random jokes that made me smile. At the lake, we found a secluded spot and spread a blanket on the grass. Lucas sat close, his knee brushing mine, and I felt the warmth of his body through my jacket. He looked at me, his eyes so deep I almost forgot how to breathe. "I'm done pretending, David," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You're everything to me, and I don't want to hide it." His words hit me like a shock, and I realized he was saying what I'd been too scared to admit. I leaned in, and his lips met mine in a kiss that was gentle but full of strength, like we were finally letting ourselves be honest. My hands slid to his neck, fingers tangling in his hair, while he pulled me closer, his palms resting on my waist, gripping it with a warmth that made me shiver. The kiss deepened, our lips moving in sync, and I felt his fingers slip under my sweater, tracing my skin with soft, careful touches. I responded, my palms gliding over his chest, feeling his heartbeat under my fingers, and I pressed myself against him, his warmth wrapping around me. We pulled apart, breathing hard, and Lucas wrapped his arms around me, pulling me so my head rested on his shoulder. His fingers slowly stroked my hair, and I held his waist, breathing in his scent, a mix of coffee and cologne. "I want us to have something real," he whispered, his lips brushing my temple. "Even if it's hard." I nodded, my fingers tightening on his jacket, and said, "Me too. We'll make it work." We sat there, pressed against each other, his hand on my back, mine on his chest, and I felt our hearts beating together. When we got home, Lucas took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine, and I knew I was ready to fight for us. We didn't know how things would turn out, but in that moment, I believed we'd find a way as long as we were together. By late December, I realized Lucas had become my home, even if Albany was just the place we lived. After our day at Finger Lake, I felt braver, like his words about our future gave me strength I didn't know I had. We were still careful around our parents, but whenever we were alone, I could feel us building something real. Mom's suspicions didn't go away, but I'd learned to live with that fear, knowing Lucas was worth the risk. I want to share this ending with you, friends, and I'm curious, what would you do in my shoes? Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever faced a choice between love and fear, and how did you handle it? One evening, when our parents went to a neighbor's party, Lucas came to my room with a serious look. He sat on the edge of my bed, his fingers fidgeting with the bracelet on his wrist, and said, "I've been thinking about us, David. We can't keep hiding forever. I want us to live openly, maybe even leave this place." His voice was steady, but I could see his eyes searching for my agreement. My heart tightened, not from fear, but from the thought that he saw a future where we were together. "You're serious?" I asked, scooting closer. "That's a big step." He nodded, his hand finding mine, and he squeezed it. "I know. But I'm ready if you're with me." We talked for hours, planning how we might move, maybe to Boston, where Lucas knew people, or another city where we could start fresh. His voice shook with excitement as he described us renting a small apartment, going to concerts, living without looking over our shoulders. I listened, my fingers tracing his palm, feeling the warmth of his skin. At one point, he leaned in, and his lips met mine in a kiss, soft but full of promise. I kissed him back, my hands sliding to his neck, while his fingers rested on my waist, pulling me closer. We kissed slowly, our breaths mingling, and I felt his palms glide to my back, caressing it with such tenderness that my heart raced. We pulled apart, and Lucas wrapped me in his arms, my body pressed against his chest. His fingers ran through my hair, and I held his waist, breathing in his familiar scent, coffee and something warm, uniquely him. "We'll make it work," he whispered, his lips brushing my temple. "Together." I nodded, feeling the fear fade, replaced by hope. We lay on the bed, holding each other, his hand resting on my shoulder, mine on his chest, and I knew this was the start of something new. Now, friends, I think about how Lucas changed me, making me braver than I ever dreamed. We haven't left yet, but we're making plans, and I believe we'll get there. What do you think matters more, being true to yourself or keeping peace with family? And how would you start a new life with someone you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear them. This story is my truth, and I'm grateful I got to share it with you.